Hi, Boardwalk investors. This is Omar Khan here with a special message about the coronavirus situation.
And I'm Sean Corbett. I handle marketing for Boardwalk Wealth. Basically, Omar, we just want to ask your opinion on a couple things today and make sure everybody's up to date on not necessarily how we're handling it, because again, you and I talked about before we hopped on this call, is we're not really qualified to talk about how to handle a health concern, but we're more qualified to talk about how this may affect investments moving forward and how our underwriting has sort of planned for this beforehand. So why don't you start off with a little intro about the virus itself?
Well, as Sean mentioned, we're not public health officials and we're not qualified to answer these sort of questions. We do feel we are able to offer a real estate perspective. That's why we've been entrusted with tens of millions of dollars to manage and to make sure that we are good stewards of capital.
Perfect. So I wanted to start off with your underwriting, which, for people who haven't gone behind the scenes like I have, it can be stringent and conservative to the point of almost being infuriating, which I think is a good thing. And I always think that you have planned, you don't hope for, but you've planned for the potential of black swan events. So talk a little bit about the underwriting methods, procedures, and philosophy leading up to this point.
Well, a lot of our business is based around our personal experiences. I have personally grown up in a few countries, both which one would call, advanced economies like Canada and the US, and then more third world countries. And those experiences have basically provided us the perspective to understand that a lot of times you don't know if an emergency or a black swan event is going to happen, but we do know that a black swan event is going to happen, and it happens at the worst possible times. So in our particular case, for our portfolio, as Sean mentioned, not only do we have very conservative underwriting, we back it up by always having ample amounts of liquidity to help us weather the storm. In our particular case, what we've done across all of our properties is not just shore up our balance sheet with ample amounts of liquidity. We've also made sure that we acquire assets in supply-constrained markets with really good social infrastructure like schools, public infrastructure like roads, jobs, and all of that. Because what this means is that while there are no recession-resistant assets, there are more recession assets that are more capable of surviving a storm versus other areas. So this is why our business model of focusing on B plus value add with very high, very good demographics, those are the types of properties that withstand these sorts of pressure. But they can't just withstand these pressures operationally, because a lot of times what happens is, as these pandemics or some other events like, say, a 2008 crisis or some other crisis happens, at all moments in time, operators need to have ample amounts of liquidity. This is a topic that we have been harping on, rather I have been harping on for a long period of time. Because when you have ample amounts of liquidity, this is behavioral economics 101. When your back is not against the wall, you are able to think logically and rationally through all the problems and come to the conclusion in a more efficient manner, as opposed to when you're stretched thin and things are not working in your favor.
Perfect. And I think you and I were also talking about behind the scenes that there's some elasticity in terms of renters with B class, because if things all go wrong and your current tenants can't afford the rent, you still have a sort of a slightly higher economic group up here that might have to, pull back on what they're paying, and then they would become our ideal tenants.
Exactly. So a lot of Class A tenants, you have to realize, they are economically advantaged. But a lot of these tenants also want to live in neighborhoods which have good school systems, good public healthcare and infrastructure facilities. So they have to be around these facilities. So unfortunately, in times of crisis, when the B class tenant potentially loses their job or their source of income, and they might have to go down, we have an influx from the top coming down. And you have to realize a lot of these people are very sticky. And as Sean said, their demand is very inelastic, because going from an A to a B plus or B is possible, but psychologically going from B plus to B to a C is very hard, because this not only requires a change in lifestyle, this requires a change in the types of schools their kids go to, the types of healthcare infrastructure they access, the types of jobs they have, or job pool they have available. So this is why for these particular types of assets in this particular type of class, this type of tenant, by the way, has a very inelastic demand. On top of that, as we're seeing right now, for a lot of Class C tenants or Class C properties with Class C tenants, these are particularly people who are the last to be hired and the first to be fired. So in their particular case, as unfortunately we go through these very sorry events, economic events and health events, they are very quickly fired. Now these people already don't have enough of a balance sheet to withstand the bad times. Delinquencies start happening, then vacancies start happening. Then as some of these people are leaving because it's already a bad situation, a lot of turnover cost starts happening because you have to cycle through these tenants in lower quality properties. And as they are leaving, they trash your place. So repairs and maintenance costs start going up. But that is not as much of a concern when you just take one step higher. Now, the problem with going to the highest possible steps in with regards to Class A is that as soon as the penny drops and there's some sort of an unfortunate event like the ones we're going through right now, a lot of those tenants immediately have to tighten their budgets. And we are the next step in their journey.
So in other words, if you're looking to get a premium on rents, that's the worst possible time to deal with those type of people.
Yeah, but at least Class A tenants who are moving to BB+, they have the ability to pay you rents for a longer period of time because these are typically white-collar professionals who saved a lot of their money. So at least they're able to withstand 6 or 7 months of, unsavory economic and health events happening to them.
Beautiful. So let's use that to segue into some of our current properties. Let's use, for example, Atlanta and Jacksonville, and just talk about a normal case scenario. So obviously it's probably going to get worse, especially in the US for the next couple of weeks before it gets better, or at least it's going to be perceived as getting worse at the very least. So I hope that you could talk about maybe what's going to go on probably, as far as it affects the investment, as far as it affects the property and the property management, and then also maybe go into a couple worst case scenarios and how as a team with the PM, we might respond to that.
So how about I break this down into what we're doing right now? Right about when this thing was starting out, we took some steps. What are we doing right now? How does this look out, say, 3 months in the future and then onwards? How about that?
Please do.
Right?
Yeah.
So what we did right around the cusp of when this was starting out, and we, had our feelers out there, and my wife is a physician, so I hear a lot more about these things than the average person. What we've already done with our property managers is that we are in the process or have curtailed severely the amount of work hours basically our staff have, because the health and well-being of our staff and our residents is our number one priority, right? Now, this means limited interaction between the staff and residents because we have to quarantine. Then on top of that, we have basically closed off all common areas, gyms, clubhouses, model units, basically cabanas, pool areas, dog parks, we have just closed those off till further notice. On top of that, maintenance costs, unless they are emergency maintenance, we have basically made sure our maintenance calls are done on an as-needed basis and not the usual, you go and fix and everything. Now, what does that do on our properties? What that does on our properties to a great extent, basically, is that it helps us to ensure that each of our staff and residents are quarantining as for whatever we can do as much as possible. So potentially, God forbid, if there is any sort of infection of coronavirus, which hasn't happened so far on our properties, we are in the best position to curtail that as much as we can, obviously, right? So those are the steps we have taken and are taking across our properties. Now, please remember that what we told our staff is even with these reduced hours, you'll keep getting paid the salary that you were going to get paid during the regular course of events, because we want you to be completely focused on taking care of your health. This is our number one priority. Money is not that important, at least to me. Again, why? Because we have ample amounts of liquidity. Now, in the next, say, 3 months or so, as per our understanding, and again, we're not public health officials, I'm not here to opine, it's going to get, as per what the experts say, going to get a lot worse before it gets better. But there are certain steps we can take, all the usual steps that you can read in the newspapers. I won't go through them. But what we're seeing going forward, though, around this 3 month mark, if right now all the way to 3 month mark is, Operators with weaker balance sheets, not enough liquidities, operators with poorer demographics that are not necessarily able to withstand the economic shock, their vacancies even right now have started skyrocketing. Either their vacancy or their bad debts and delinquencies have already started skyrocketing. So 3 months into the future, what we do feel is that there will be, at least if not a reduction in price, flexibility in the owners. Current owners who want to sell and get out of their positions, they'll have a lot more flexibility. Now, what does this mean for you? What this means from you is, as a current investor, is that because we have ample liquidity, because we are situated in prime supply-constrained markets, where frankly, after us, there is no other option because there's not enough residential units available. This means that our properties have the highest probability of having their occupancy kept up, both because of the market and the steps we have taken. In a 6-month period of time, what it does mean is that as we are basically the best run, the most efficiently run property in the neighborhood, we actually have potentially a higher amount of occupancy as tenants leave and residents leave weaker properties with not good management that are not taking care of themselves.
So now that we've talked about you can call it the normal or the intelligent response to this and how it's actually happening on the ground, I'd just like you to take a second. We don't have to get too dark with this, but just take a second and let's brainstorm a few things. Worst case scenario for the current holdings. How do you see that playing out for the investors? Like, let's say, I don't know, do you see it? Or I should say, what's the timeline that you would say things are all shut down that would affect maybe the next distribution or would really muck things up? Just from your perspective, what's kind of the worst case scenario and how would you handle it?
So, look, the worst case scenario obviously means there's nobody in the property. That's what I feel is the worst case scenario. So, in that particular case, we have over 6 months worth of distributions, and on top of that, 6 months worth of loan payments already as liquidity in our bank. Again, why do we do that? Even though it's harder for us to go raise more money, it affects our numbers. The reason why we keep doing these things is to make sure that when the bad times do strike, we are able to get through the bad times with the least amount of losses. If you don't have a strong balance sheet, if you don't have ample liquidity, this is going to be very bad for you. But if you have enough liquidity, you have a good balance sheet, and you run your properties efficiently, while this in the short term is going to cause pain, in the long term, it is going to be business as usual.
Very good to hear. Now, to wrap this up, and to hit on a point that's, I think, very important to a lot of our investors, you've been scouting a bunch of deals, new deals recently.
Yeah.
And now with this issue, I think, and not to sound too cold about it, but there are a few opportunities out there, especially in terms of what lending is available. So do you see any opportunities in the immediate future, in the short term, that we may want to act on and people may want to take advantage of, as long as they're doing it with a clear head?
Well, yes, there are a few opportunities. In fact, in the couple of markets we're active in Texas, Florida, and Georgia, we're already seeing very attractive deals fall out, which means that the deals are right about to be closed. Not just with us, but we plus a lot of our other sponsors who are doing this. And people have backed off because, frankly, if this becomes worse in the next 3 to 4 weeks, as I mentioned earlier, there's a high probability of that. And as vacancies start spiking up, as delinquencies start spiking up, as weaker players in the market start actually getting more pain and they don't have enough liquidity and balance sheet to go through that pain, they will become a lot more flexible on the pricing that they want because they just have to get out of these situations. So while we are already seeing a lot of deals and a lot of bargaining power coming towards the buyers like us, a lot of flexibility from the sellers, we do expect that in the next 2 or 3 weeks, it will, if these things continue the way they are projected to continue, sellers will become a lot more flexible and you will be able to get some bargains.
And will you be pursuing some of those in the next couple
of
months?
Yes, we are aggressively pursuing them. And this is where, the power of our relationships comes into play. Already I'm looking at 3 opportunities in Atlanta, 1 in Dallas, 1 in Jacksonville. And the only reason why we were even in contention, they're all off-market opportunities, is because brokers know we can close. We have a good balance sheet. I keep talking about the same points, right? We have good balance sheet, good liquidity. So even in these trying times, They know that we are closers. We have good reputations in the market. So they come to us first before they go somewhere else.
Okay. And last thing to wrap it up, let's say, this is actually a real point. We have a couple investors that were coming to us in the last few months saying, I'm ready, find a deal. I want to invest. Let's go. We like what you guys are saying. If they looked at what's happening right now and they said to you, Omar, I was ready to invest some money. I wanted you to get a new deal, but right now I'm not sure if I should act. What would you say to them? In terms of, and again, I'm not saying we convince someone to do something that doesn't want to do something. I'm saying someone was ready to invest and now they're asking your opinion. Should I really invest or should maybe I just hold off for another month or two?
Well, the number one thing I always tell people in good times and bad times is that I invest my own personal capital into these fields. So I put my money where my mouth is in good times and bad times. So my money goes in first and it leads in the end. So with regards to, look, whether you should or shouldn't invest, we have been so conservative in the good times and we will continue to be conservative in the bad times that for us, market cycles aren't as much of an issue as what the price is and what the future holds given our assumptions. And because we are so conservative, whereas in the good times, we don't do like volumes of deals, but in the bad times, we do know that we are well positioned to take advantage. So if you feel what you hear are things that you like, you are conservative, you take a long-term approach of things, then it is the right time to invest. But if you want to feel more emotional or if you feel the world is about to end, then my advice has always been the same. Look, you've worked really hard for your money and you should feel comfortable investing your money with someone. So if you don't feel comfortable, don't invest. But this is the right time to invest if things get worse.
Omar, I appreciate your time today. Basically, it's an efficient operation, business as usual for Boardwalk Wealth. If you want to reach out and you have any questions at all, if you felt like you want to extrapolate on some of the points that Omar talked about today, you can just email him directly, Omar, OMAR, at boardwalkwealth.com. If you're not already on our email list, we do send out updates 2 or 3 times a month. So you might want to get on that as well. It's pretty consistent. You'll find out what's going on behind the scenes. You can do that by just visiting the website. There's a sign-up form right on the homepage, boardwalkwealth.com. Thanks, Omar.
Thank you very much, Sean.